Society forgives many sins, but public scandal is rarely one of them. Miss Bryony Wyndham knew the strict rules of Mayfair perfectly, yet there she stood, pressing her lips against a complete stranger to hide his face from armed men. She thought she was saving a servant. She was entirely wrong. London in the spring of 1815 was a city balancing on the edge of a knife. Napoleon Bonaparte had escaped Elba. The continent was holding its collective breath, and the British War Office, led secretly in the shadows by Lord Bathurst, was operating in a state of quiet, desperate frenzy. Yet, inside the opulent, suffocatingly warm walls of the Earl of Harrington's Mayfair estate, the Ton cared only for the opening ball of the season. Bryony Wyndham did not care for the ball, the season, or the endless parade of titled gentlemen who looked past her. At 24, she was firmly categorized as a spinster, a convenient chaperone for her younger, far wealthier cousin, Clara. Bryony possessed a sharp mind, a pragmatic disposition, and absolutely no dowry. Her evening consisted of pressing herself into the shadows of the grand ballroom, avoiding the predatory, lingering gaze of Lord Harrington, and wishing she were back in her quiet, draughty bedchamber, reading a smuggled copy of Mary Wollstonecraft's essays. Seeking a moment of respite from the suffocating scent of heavily perfumed aristocrats and melting beeswax, Bryony slipped behind a heavy crimson velvet curtain that concealed a small, recessed alcove overlooking the garden. The music of the string quartet faded into a muffled thrum. She closed her eyes, letting the cool draught from the slightly ajar window wash over her heated skin. A sudden, violent rustle of fabric shattered her peace. Before Bryony could even draw a breath to scream, a heavy weight crashed into her, pinning her against the silk-lined wall of the alcove. A large, calloused hand clamped firmly over her mouth. "Make a sound, and we are both dead," a voice rasped against her ear. It was a harsh, breathless command, laced with an undeniable undercurrent of genuine peril. Bryony's eyes flew open, adjusting to the dim light filtering through the gardens. The man pressing against her was tall, solid, and entirely out of place at a peer's ball. He wore a plain, dark wool coat that was torn at the shoulder, reeking of damp alleyways, cold sweat, and the unmistakable metallic tang of danger. His hair was disheveled, falling over a face obscured by the shadows, but she could see the sharp, aristocratic line of his jaw and the terrifying intensity of his pale blue eyes. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving against hers in a way that was entirely scandalous. "They are right behind me," he whispered, his grip on her mouth loosening just enough for her to speak. "French agents, Fouché's men. If they find me, they will not hesitate to silence you as well." Bryony's mind raced. Joseph Fouché was the infamous French Minister of Police, a name spoken in hushed, terrified tones by her uncle when discussing the war. What was a man hunted by French spies doing in Lord Harrington's alcove? And more importantly, why was he dressed like a dock worker? Footsteps echoed just outside the heavy velvet curtain. They were not the light, dancing steps of partygoers, but the heavy, deliberate tread of men searching for prey. "Did you see him?" A low, heavily accented voice muttered just inches from the fabric. "No, but he must be here." The blood trail stopped at the terrace. "Check the curtains," another voice replied. The stranger tensed, his hand dropping from Bryony's mouth as his other hand went to the small of his back, drawing a wicked-looking dagger that caught the faint moonlight. He prepared to lunge, a desperate man cornered in a trap. Bryony knew with absolute certainty that if he fought them here, men would die, and she would be caught in the crossfire. There was no time for logic. There was no time to consider her reputation, her family, or the strict rules of propriety that had governed her entire life. As the edge of the crimson curtain was violently yanked back, flooding the alcove with the harsh light of 1,000 chandeliers, Bryony made a choice. She grabbed the stranger by the rough lapels of his wool coat, yanked him down to her level, and smashed her mouth against his. The man froze, his entire body going rigid with shock. Bryony, fueled by adrenaline and sheer terror, did not relent. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her fingers in his hair, and kissed him with the desperation of a starving woman. She angled her face, ensuring her wide, feathered masquerade mask and her cascading curls completely obscured his profile from the intruders. "What the devil?" one of the armed men gasped, freezing in the entryway of the alcove. Bryony broke the kiss for a fraction of a second, her lips bruised and burning, and let out a breathless, scandalous giggle that sounded entirely alien to her own ears. "My lord, please," she murmured into the stranger's mouth, pitching her voice to a sultry, embarrassed whine. "We promised to be discreet. What if my aunt sees?" She immediately pulled him back down, kissing him again. This time the stranger reacted. The dagger slipped back into its sheath, and his hands came up to grip her waist. He didn't just accept the kiss, he took control of it. His mouth moved against hers with a sudden, devastating expertise, transforming a frantic, life-saving collision into something that made Bryony's knees buckle. He tasted of brandy and danger, and for a terrifying singular moment, Bryony forgot about the spies, the ball, and her own name. "Bleeding aristocrats!" The second man spat in disgust, dropping the heavy curtain back into place. "Come on, he's not in here. Let's check the servants' quarters." The heavy footsteps quickly retreated, fading back into the chaotic noise of the ballroom. Bryony pushed the man away, her chest heaving, her face flushed with heat that had nothing to do with the stifling temperature of the room. She wiped her mouth with the back of her trembling hand, staring at the stranger in the dim light. He looked equally bewildered, though a slow, dangerous smirk began to tug at the corner of his mouth. "I must say," he murmured, his voice smoothing out from its previous rough rasp into an accent that reeked of expensive education and hidden power. "If that is how you treat every vagrant who climbs through your window, London society is vastly more entertaining than I was led to believe." "You are welcome for your life, sir," Bryony hissed, furiously trying to smooth down her ruined bodice. "Now get out before I call the guards myself." He stepped closer, his demeanor shifting back to serious. He reached out, taking her hand. His thumb brushed over her knuckles in a gesture that was intimately terrifying. "I owe you my life, Miss—" "You owe me your absence," she countered, snatching her hand back. "Go. Now." The stranger offered a low, sweeping bow that mocked his ragged clothing. "You are a brave little fool. I will not forget this." With the agility of a ghost, he slipped silently out the open window, vanishing into the thick London fog rolling over the gardens, leaving Bryony alone with a racing heart and a deeply compromised reputation. Bryony took 3 deep breaths, straightened her skirts, and prayed the frantic flush had left her cheeks. She turned to exit the alcove, desperately hoping to melt back into the shadows of the ballroom and find her cousin. She pushed past the crimson curtain and froze. Standing not 5 feet away, her lorgnette raised to her scandalized eyes, was Lady Agatha Danvers. Lady Agatha possessed the sharpest tongue in Mayfair, and a network of gossips that rivaled Lord Bathurst's own intelligence agency. Beside her stood Lord Harrington, his face a mask of twisted, arrogant amusement. "Well," Lady Agatha breathed, her voice carrying over the string quartet like a gunshot. "It seems Miss Wyndham has finally found a use for her time in the shadows. Though I must say, associating with a member of the lower classes in such a rigorous manner is a new low, even for a penniless spinster." Bryony's stomach plummeted. They had seen, perhaps not the men with the guns, but they had seen the end of the kiss. They had seen her entangled with a man in ragged clothing. "Lady Agatha, I assure you, "It is not what you think," Bryony started, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to keep it steady. "Save your breath, Miss Wyndham," Lord Harrington sneered, stepping forward. "We saw exactly what occurred. A disgraceful display under my roof. I expect you and your family to depart my home immediately." By noon the next day, Bryony was entirely ruined. The gossip ripped through the elegant drawing rooms of Grosvenor Square and the exclusive gentlemen's clubs of St. James's Street with the destructive force of a wildfire. The story grew with every retelling. First, she had kissed a servant. Then, she had been caught in a compromising position with a stable boy. By evening, it was whispered that she was running an illicit ring of romantic espionage with a gang of Covent Garden footpads. Even Beau Brummel, the arbiter of London fashion and society, was reported to have laughed into his cravat upon hearing the tale. The reaction within the Wyndham household was swift and brutal. Bryony's uncle, Lord Percival Wyndham, a man who valued his social standing above his own pulse, summoned her to his study. "You have disgraced this family, Bryony," he roared, his face an apoplectic shade of purple. "No gentleman will ever look at you now. Your cousin Clara's prospects are tainted by association. I took you in when your father died in debt, and this is how you repay my charity, by behaving like a common streetwalker in the Earl of Harrington's home." "Uncle, please, you must listen. The man was in danger." "Silence!" He slammed his fist on the mahogany desk. "I will not hear your pathetic excuses. You are a blight on this house. You will pack your belongings. I have written to a distant cousin in Yorkshire. He operates a bleak, isolated rectory on the moors. You will go there, and you will spend the rest of your miserable life repenting for your scandalous nature. You leave at dawn." For the next 3 days, Bryony lived as a ghost in her own home. The servants averted their eyes. Clara was forbidden from speaking to her. Bryony packed her small, worn leather trunk with a heavy heart, resigning herself to a life of grey skies, bitter wind, and absolute isolation. She had traded her future for the life of a stranger who was probably already dead in a ditch somewhere, courtesy of Fouché's assassins. On the morning of her departure, an unnatural silence fell over the Wyndham household. Bryony, dressed in her plainest travelling gown, was dragging her trunk toward the front hall when she heard a commotion outside. She looked through the front window and stopped dead in her tracks. Pulling up to the curb of their modest Mayfair townhouse was a carriage of terrifying magnificence. It was painted a deep, gleaming midnight blue, pulled by 4 perfectly matched, purebred black Andalusians. The footmen standing at the back wore liveries of silver and navy, and on the door of the carriage, rendered in solid gold leaf, was a crest that commanded instant, terrified respect across all of England, a roaring lion clutching a crown. It was the crest of the Duke of Rothford. Axton Cavendish, the Duke of Rothford, was a man of mythic proportions. He was notoriously reclusive, fabulously wealthy, and possessed a political influence that supposedly reached the ear of the Prince Regent himself. He was also known to be ruthless, cold, and entirely uninterested in the social maneuverings of the ton. Lord Wyndham came scrambling down the stairs, his dressing gown flapping around his ankles, his face pale with a mixture of shock and sheer panic. "What is the meaning of this? Why is the Duke of Rothford at my door?" A footman hopped down and opened the carriage door. The man who stepped onto the pavement was a far cry from the bleeding, ragged vagrant Bryony had shoved against the wall of an alcove. He was dressed in impeccable, terrifyingly expensive tailoring, a coat of dark, superfine wool that fit perfectly across his broad shoulders, a crisp white cravat tied with mathematical precision, and polished Hessian boots that gleamed in the morning sun. Yet, as he removed his top hat and looked up at the house, Bryony felt the air leave her lungs. It was the same sharp jawline, the same dark, slightly unruly hair, the same piercing, terrifyingly intense blue eyes. The Duke of Rothford strode up the steps and slammed the heavy brass knocker. Lord Wyndham, trembling, threw open the door himself, shoving his butler aside. "Your Grace, what an unparalleled, unexpected honour. Please come in. My home is yours." The Duke stepped into the foyer. He did not look at Lord Wyndham. He did not look at the opulent, desperately trying to be fashionable decor. His eyes immediately locked onto Bryony, who was standing frozen next to her battered travelling trunk. "Lord Wyndham," the Duke said, his voice the same smooth, dark velvet that had mocked her in the darkness days ago. "I am not here for your hospitality. I am here for her." He pointed a long, aristocratic finger directly at Bryony. Lord Wyndham gasped, looking between the Duke and his disgraced niece. "Your Grace, surely there is a mistake. This is Bryony. She is being sent away. She is ruined." "She is ruined," the Duke replied softly, taking a deliberate step toward Bryony, his eyes never leaving hers. "Because she saved my life, and I have come to collect my debt." Silence descended upon the Wyndham foyer, thick and suffocating. Lord Percival's jaw unhinged, his eyes darting frantically between the imposing figure of Axton Cavendish and his notoriously plain, entirely unmarriageable niece. "Debt?" Lord Wyndham choked out, his aristocratic polish entirely stripped away by raw shock. "Your Grace, I cannot fathom what service my niece could have possibly rendered you. She is a sheltered girl, prone to flights of fancy." "Your inability to perceive her worth does not diminish it, Wyndham," Axton interrupted, his tone freezing the older man in his tracks. He did not raise his voice. He possessed the terrifying quietness of a man who commanded armies and destroyed political careers before breakfast. Miss Wyndham intervened during a matter of national security. In doing so, she compromised her own standing to ensure my survival. I am a man who settles his ledgers. Therefore, I have brought a special license." Bryony, who had spent the last 3 days alternating between numb despair and furious resentment, dropped the leather handle of her trunk. "A special license? For what?" Axton finally pulled his gaze from her uncle and looked down at her. The mocking smirk from the alcove was gone, replaced by a calculating, impenetrable mask. "For our marriage, Miss Wyndham. We are to be wed at St. George's within the hour." "You are mad," Bryony breathed, forgetting entirely that she was speaking to a peer of the realm. "I do not know you. You are a stranger who dragged me into an alleyway brawl, ruined my life, and now you burst into my uncle's house, demanding marriage as if ordering a new carriage." Lord Wyndham let out a strangled squeak of terror at her insolence, but the Duke merely tilted his head, a flicker of genuine respect warming his ice-blue eyes. "I am Axton Cavendish," he said smoothly, "and I am offering you an alternative to a drafty Yorkshire rectory. As my Duchess, you will wield enough social power to crush Lady Agatha Danvers and Lord Harrington with a single glance. More importantly, you will be under my protection. The men who hunted me at the ball are still in London, and thanks to Harrington's loose tongue, they now know the face of the woman who aided me." Bryony's blood ran cold. The French spies, Fouché's agents. Axton turned to her uncle, withdrawing a heavy leather satchel from his coat and tossing it onto a nearby console table with a heavy metallic thud. £10,000, Wyndham. A settlement for the sudden loss of your niece. You will inform society that we have been secretly engaged since last autumn, and her behaviour at Harrington's ball was merely a passionate reunion. Do we understand each other? Greed instantly eclipsed Lord Wyndham's fear. He practically threw himself at the satchel. "Perfectly, Your Grace. An absolute blessing. Bryony, go fetch your bonnet." Less than 2 hours later, Bryony stood in the cavernous, echoing nave of St. George's, Hanover Square, repeating vows to a man she had met in the dark. As they rode back to the imposing Rothford house in Grosvenor Square, Axton poured 2 glasses of brandy from a crystal decanter built into the carriage wall, handing one to his new wife. "Drink," he commanded gently. "You are trembling." Bryony took a deep swallow, the fiery liquid steadying her nerves. "Why did you really marry me, Your Grace?" "Do not speak to me of honour. A duke does not marry a ruined spinster solely for a debt of gratitude." Axton leaned back against the plush velvet squabs, assessing her with a predatory stillness. "You are astoundingly pragmatic, Bryony. I require that in a partner." "Very well, the truth. I operate directly under Viscount Castlereagh and Lord Bathurst. I intercept foreign intelligence. For the past 6 months, I have been tracking a leak within the War Office, an English aristocrat selling troop movements to Napoleon's network." Bryony gasped. "Treason, in the highest circles." "Precisely," Axton nodded. "My bachelorhood has made me a target. I am constantly invited, scrutinized, and pursued by ambitious mothers and their daughters. I need a shield. I require society to believe I am a besotted, newly married man, entirely distracted by domestic bliss. You need a restored reputation and protection from Fouché's assassins. It is a mutually beneficial arrangement." "And the men who were hunting you?" "They were attempting to secure a cipher I had stolen from a courier," Axton explained, tapping his chest pocket. "We intercepted a list of Napoleon's sympathizers in London. The man who orchestrated the attack on me at the ball is the traitor we seek, and I believe I know who he is." Bryony's mind raced back to the ball, the heavy footsteps, the layout of the estate. "Lord Harrington," she whispered. Axton smiled, a dangerous, thrilling expression. "You are a remarkably intelligent woman, Duchess." "Yes." Harrington allowed the assassins through his private garden gates. "And tonight, at the Prime Minister's gala, we are going to force him to make a mistake." Lord Liverpool's gala at Fife House was a blinding display of wealth and power, practically vibrating with the nervous energy of a nation at war. Chandeliers blazed above women draped in smuggled French silks, and men glittering with military medals. When the Duke and Duchess of Rothford were announced, the ballroom plunged into a deafening, stunned silence. Bryony stood at the top of the grand staircase, wearing a gown of midnight blue silk that exactly matched her husband's carriage, adorned with the legendary Rothford diamonds. They cascaded down her throat like frozen fire. Beside her, Axton looked like an avenging god in severe evening wear. Lady Agatha Danvers, standing near the punch bowl, dropped her crystal cup. It shattered on the marble floor. Axton placed his hand firmly at the small of Bryony's back, projecting absolute, possessive devotion. "Smile, my dear," he murmured against her ear, sending an involuntary shiver down her spine. "Let them look. Let them see that you are untouchable." They descended the stairs, and the crowd parted like the Red Sea. Axton played his part flawlessly. He fetched her champagne, he stared at her lips when she spoke, and he refused to dance with anyone but her. Bryony, fortified by his unwavering presence, found herself genuinely laughing, leaning into his touch, and marveling at the brilliant, dangerous mind hiding behind his aristocratic charm. But beneath the surface of the glittering waltz, a deadly game was unfolding. Axton had deliberately leaked false information to a known gossip earlier that afternoon, hinting that he carried the translated cipher in his breast pocket. The bait was set. Near midnight, Bryony excused herself to the retiring room. As she walked down a dimly lit corridor, a hand shot out from behind a marble bust, grabbing her arm and violently yanking her into a darkened antechamber. Bryony stumbled in the dark, her back hitting a heavy oak bookshelf. A man stepped into the faint light filtering from the hallway. Lord Harrington. His face was twisted in a mask of desperate panic, holding a small, silver-barreled pistol aimed directly at her chest. Make a sound, your grace, and I will end you, Harrington hissed, his breath reeking of sour wine and fear. Where is he? Where is Rothford? If you shoot me, you will not make it out of Fife House alive, Bryony said, her voice remarkably steady. The terrified girl who had cowered in the alcove weeks ago was gone. The Duchess of Rothford stood in her place. I need the cipher, Harrington demanded, stepping closer. He knows. I know he knows. If I deliver the cipher to Fouché's men tonight at the docks, they will grant me safe passage to France. Tell me where he keeps it, or I will use you as a hostage to get it from him. He keeps it exactly where you would expect. A voice echoed from the shadows behind Harrington. Harrington whirled around, raising the pistol. Axton stepped out from the darkness of a heavy velvet drape, his own weapon already drawn and levelled at Harrington's head. But Axton was not alone. Behind him stood two immense Bow Street runners, their expressions grim. You are a fool, Harrington, Axton said coldly. Did you truly believe I would let my wife walk these halls unescorted when I knew a cornered rat was in the building? Harrington's hand shook violently. He looked between Axton's steady pistol and Bryony, realizing he was trapped. In a final desperate act of cowardice, he turned the gun toward Bryony, intending to use the distraction to flee. He never pulled the trigger. Bryony, anticipating the movement, grabbed a heavy, bronze candelabra from the shelf beside her and smashed it with all her might across Harrington's wrist. A sickening crack echoed in the room. Harrington screamed, dropping the pistol as the Bow Street runners surged forward, tackling the treasonous Earl to the floor and binding his hands. Axton crossed the room in two massive strides, hauling Bryony into his arms. He buried his face in her neck, his chest heaving, his iron composure finally fracturing. Are you hurt? He demanded roughly, pulling back to frantically check her face, her arms. I should never have let him get this close. If he had fired... I am perfectly fine, Bryony interrupted softly, reaching up to frame his jaw with her hands. You promised I would be under your protection. I trusted you. Axton looked down at her, the cold, calculating spy entirely vanishing, leaving behind a man violently, desperately in love. The arrangement was for a marriage of convenience, Bryony. But there is nothing convenient about the thought of losing you. The danger will not entirely disappear. I am still Castlereagh's man. But if you wish to leave this life, if you wish to retreat to a quiet country estate, I will send you with half my fortune. Bryony smiled, pulling him down by his lapels exactly as she had done on the night they met. But this time there was no fear, no masquerade, and no audience. I have spent my entire life being quiet and safe, Your Grace, she whispered against his lips. I think I prefer the danger, so long as it is with you. Axton kissed her, a deep, consuming promise of absolute devotion, sealing a partnership that would become the most formidable, secretive, and scandalous legend in the history of the British Crown. Did Bryony and Axton's thrilling tale of espionage, scandal, and unexpected romance capture your heart? If you loved this journey from a ruined reputation to a powerful ducal marriage, please like this video, share it with your fellow history and romance lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating, real-life inspired stories of love and danger. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a scandalous twist.